Alright, welcome to the Strange North channel. In this video, I'm going to tell you about the first reported case of crop circles that happened in Canada, and this happened in 1967. This event happened near the hamlet of Duhamel, which is about 100 kilometers southeast of Edmonton. Some reports say this happened near the town of Camrose, but it actually happened closer to the hamlet of Duhamel, which is about 20 kilometers away from the town of Camrose. And when this occurred in 1967, crop circles were virtually unknown around the world. This wasn't really a thing, and this was the first reported case of something like this happening in Canada. Now, this happened in early August of 1967, but prior to this discovery, there were a whole bunch of UFO reports in this area prior to this event. On June 2nd of that year, a couple sisters claimed to have seen a cream-colored saucer with a metallic glint that was hovering above a field, and this happened about 3 miles from the Duhamel discovery. These sisters said that this UFO was bobbing up and down near the ground as if to attract attention, and they said they were about 200 to 300 yards away from this thing. Later on, a farmer's wife saw a red glowing orb skimmer across her field and then disappear. And then on July 3rd, another resident in the area heard a car drive into her field at night, and then she said she heard 2 shots, and then an object with multicolored lights rose up from the field and then moved away quickly. And so there were definitely a few UFO sightings in this area prior to the discovery of the circles. And then on Saturday, August 5th of 1967, there was a farmer in the area named Edgar Schielke, and he said that he discovered these large circles on the ground on his farm as he was walking his fields after a night of heavy rainfall. Mr. Schielke said that this was the first time that he had been to this field in weeks, and that the circles could have really appeared at any time during the last couple of weeks. He said that he found 4 large circles on the ground, and they were about 30 feet in diameter. Now, these circles weren't actually imprinted into crops, they were just simply burned into the ground on this field on his property. And 3 of the rings were essentially circular, and the largest one was slightly elliptical. And specifically, the rings ranged from 34 feet 5 inches to 36 feet 3 inches in diameter. Apparently, there were no visible scorch marks, exhaust blasts, or disturbances of the soil, and vegetation had been removed within the circles. After Mr. Schielke made this discovery, he notified the local press immediately, and this was followed by a bunch of interest from the national media and a UFO club in Edmonton. This event even caught the attention of the Canadian military, and they sent a scientist from their facility at the Suffield Canadian Forces Base, which is about 50 kilometers west of Medicine Hat. This military scientist compiled an official report, and it was titled On-Site Inspection of Reputed UFO Landing Marks at Duhamel, Alberta, and this was authored by G.H.S. Jones. This paper carefully documented what was discovered at Mr. Schielke's farm. In this paper, it documented that the 4 rings in the grass that were discovered were actually incomplete. They formed more of a horseshoe shape, and that the marks were made by crushed and discolored grass. This military investigator talked about the possibility of the marks being made by a wheel, but he clearly stated that the marks were likely left by, quote, a 135-ton aircraft or spacecraft. Of course, by the time this investigator came out to the site, many others had visited the farm, and their tracks and tire marks were all over the place, and this kind of made the investigation a little more complicated. But this investigator did say that these circles were very distinct from the surrounding tire tracks, and he also made note of the fact that inside the marks there were small thumbnail-sized pieces of vegetation removed. I also read that there was an unpublished report that one of these rings had actually smashed through a willow fence that was in the area, as if some sort of machine had come down from above and imprinted these marks on the ground and had happened to clip a nearby fence. And in this paper, the military investigator did say that this could have been a hoax, but he said that to create these circles would have been very difficult, especially without leaving any additional tracks behind. And so his ultimate conclusion was that he thought that these things were not a hoax and that they were created by, quote, a 135-ton aircraft or spacecraft. And so this ultimately became known as Canada's first reported case of crop circles. And yes, these marks were found on the ground in grass as opposed to being imprinted in actual crops, as is very common in other cases of crop circles. But it was still an interesting discovery, and both Mr. Schielke, the farmer who owned the land, as well as military investigators maintained that they thought that this was not a hoax, that these things were genuine. And of course, with all of the UFO reports preceding this discovery, people in the area really felt that this was caused by something non-human and possibly extraterrestrial. Now, interestingly, a few days after the discovery of the circles at Duhamel, on Tuesday, August 8th, David and Beryl Cahill saw a UFO above their house in Edmonton, and they managed to take a pretty good picture of it. This picture ended up being used in a big Edmonton Journal article, and I just always wondered if this was in some way related to the events near Duhamel. And I also found it interesting that these events happened in 1967, because that year was a really big year for UFO activity in Canada. 1967 was the same year as the Falcon Lake incident, which is really one of the most well-documented UFO sightings in history, as well as the Shag Harbour incident in Nova Scotia, which is another one of Canada's most well-known UFO sightings. And funny enough, this was the same year that the world's first official UFO landing pad was opened in St. Paul, Alberta. And so Canada's Centennial year of 1967 was a really big year for UFO interest within the country. And that's pretty much the story of the Duhamel circles that were discovered in 1967. There's not a lot of information available about this case. I just wanted to present this story in video form for whoever might be interested. I've always been interested in this stuff, and ultimately this remains the first reported case of crop circles in Canada. I hope you found that interesting and informative, and I'm working on a couple more videos dealing with UFOs within Canada, including a video on former Canadian Defense Minister Paul Hellyer, who has made some very bold claims about UFOs. And I'm also working on a video on the Falcon Lake sighting in Manitoba. This is really one of the most well-documented UFO encounters in the world. If you watched this far, thank you very much, and if you're interested in watching more of my content in general, please consider subscribing to my channel. I took a bit of a break, but generally I upload about one new video per week. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Strange North channel.